They say a man doesn't really see the cracks in his home until the lights go out. I was still clapping when I realized I was in the dark. Opening night. The theater buzzed with the kind of electric tension that only a first performance could generate. I sat in the front row, third seat from the left, just like always. Rachel liked me there. Said it helped her focus, knowing her husband was close enough to hear every breath she took. I believed her. Back then, I still believed in a lot of things. She stood under the lights, stage left, dressed in a vintage red coat that used to hang in our shared closet. I remember buying it for her on our anniversary in Paris. She said it made her feel like an actress from an old French noir. Seeing her wear it now, speaking lines that dripped with longing and secrets, felt like opening a door into a room I hadn't been invited into. The director, Damon, sat 2 rows behind me. I could hear his quiet grunts of satisfaction every time the audience laughed, gasped, or leaned forward. He wore a scarf indoors and sipped wine from a silver flask like it was part of his contract with the universe. Rachel once called him a tortured genius. I called him a pretentious drunk. But in the world of indie theater, those 2 identities are often mistaken for the same thing. I didn't mind Damon at first. He was polite, charismatic in a used car salesman kind of way. He called me my good man and shook my hand like he was about to sell me a yacht. Rachel met him through a discussion group at the Arts Center. I went with her once. It was the kind of gathering where people wore horn-rimmed glasses and said things like, the subtext here, of course, is postmodern dread. Rachel and I had a tradition. After every play she was in, we'd go to the little cafe across from the theater, order espresso and cheesecake, and talk about the performance. That night, she didn't want to go. Said she was tired. Said Damon needed to discuss revisions. Said next time. Next time never came. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her scene kept replaying in my head. It was about a woman torn between duty and desire. Standard theatrical fare, until I realized something. Her lines were ours, word for word, things we'd said during our last argument. Things I'd only whispered to her when the world was quiet. The cadence was unmistakable. My private words, now public, dressed in theatrical flair. The audience clapped. I felt gutted. The next morning, Rachel acted like nothing had happened. She made coffee, kissed me on the cheek, and hummed a tune from the play. I wanted to ask her. Wanted to say, why are our secrets on stage? But I didn't. Because I already knew the answer. I started attending rehearsals under the guise of being supportive. I'd sit in the back, notebook in hand, pretending to take notes for a blog I didn't have. I watched them. Not just the blocking or the acting, but them, Rachel and Damon. The way she tilted her head when he whispered in her ear. The way he touched her elbow longer than necessary. It was theater, I told myself. All for show. But there's a kind of intimacy you can't fake, and I was watching it unfold under stage lights. One afternoon, I offered to pick up lunch for the troupe. Damon gave me his order like I was the intern. Rachel didn't even look at me. That was the day I stopped being a husband and started being an audience member in my own life. I dug deeper. Started checking her email when she left her laptop open. Harmless at first. A calendar invite. A message to Damon with subject lines like, tonight, and script edit. One day, I clicked on an attachment labeled Final Revisions. It was a script. But the script wasn't fiction. It was a transcript. Our conversations. Our fights. Our private life. Laid bare in stage directions and monologues. Damon hadn't written the play. Rachel had. And she had used me as her muse. I should have been furious. I should have confronted her. But instead, I did something worse. I smiled. Because in that moment, a plan began to take shape. Revenge isn't loud. It doesn't slam doors or scream into pillows. Real revenge is patient. Calculated. The slow pull of thread until everything unravels. So I went to Damon. Told him I wanted to support the arts. Said I was interested in investing in the festival they were planning. He was all charm and backslaps. Called me a patron of truth and beauty. I wrote the checks, smiled at Rachel, and told her how proud I was. And all the while, I was writing too. Late nights, alone in my office. A script of my own. A play about betrayal, performance, and the fine line between art and lies. I called it a theater for one. It opens with a man in the front row, clapping. Part 2. The allure of applause. They say applause is the drug of the performer. But I learned it can be the camouflage of betrayal. Rachel bathed in it, soaked in the adoration of strangers while she slowly turned her back on everything familiar. After that first show, Rachel changed. Not all at once. At first, it was subtle. She started using phrases like the artistic process and truthful expression whenever I questioned why she came home late. Her phone, once left charging on the kitchen counter, now lived in her purse, zipped shut like a bank vault. She told me she needed space to explore her character, that being in a leading role demanded emotional availability. I nodded like a good husband. But inside, I was auditing everything. Every late return, every shift in tone, every new phrase Damon implanted in her lexicon. She wasn't coming home tired anymore. She was energized, electric, her eyes glittering with a secret she refused to share. She stopped making the bed. That sounds like a petty complaint, but you have to understand, Rachel made the bed every single morning. It was part of her routine. She once told me an unmade bed was like a broken promise. And now, every morning, I woke up next to a rumpled sheet and a cold pillow. One evening, she asked if I could help her run lines. I was surprised. A part of me foolishly hoped she wanted to reconnect. She handed me a script and pointed to a passage where I was to read the role of James, a man confronting his wife about her emotional distance. As I read the lines, I felt like I was reading from my own diary. My voice cracked. Rachel barely noticed. She was focused on nailing her emotional beats. Afterward, she thanked me and returned to her laptop. I stared at her back for 10 minutes, wondering when she had stopped needing me to see her and started needing me only as a sounding board. The theater company began announcing a series of workshops and performances. Damon gave interviews calling Rachel his greatest discovery. He compared her to Joan of Arc, saying she brought the same mix of fire and fragility to the stage. I wanted to vomit. Instead, I framed the article and hung it in her office. Let her see that I knew what was going on, even if I didn't say it. She started taking overnight trips for read-throughs. I offered to join one, saying I could use the time to write. She smiled, shook her head, and said the cabin didn't have Wi-Fi. I checked. It did. A luxury lodge tucked into the mountains with gourmet meals and high-speed internet. When she returned, her skin glowed from the mountain air and something else I didn't want to name. She smelled like sandalwood and bourbon, Damon's signature cologne. I knew because I once asked him what he wore, pretending to be interested. He laughed and said, "It's French." Like sin. I began tracking expenses. Quietly. No accusations. Just collecting data. A boutique hotel in Santa Fe. An expensive bottle of Bordeaux charged to her personal card. A receipt for a dinner for two at a place she always said was too fancy for us. She was building a story without realizing it. And I was the archivist. I also began studying the plays. Every line, every stage direction. I found an old recording of the initial read-throughs. In it, Rachel stammered through her lines, uncertain. Damon coached her with touches and whispers. Then I played the final performance. The difference was staggering. She no longer played the character, she was the character. And the character, I realized, wasn't fictional. It was her. Or at least, the version of her she wanted to be. Free. Desired. Applauded. Our dinners became quieter. She spoke about theater, about art, about the transformative power of performance. I nodded. Asked questions. Played dumb. She was in love with the sound of her own insight, and I let her perform. Then one night, I found a draft of another play. It was on her desk, barely hidden, titled The Man Who Waited. It was about a woman trapped in a marriage with a man too blind to see who she really was. The woman escapes, finds a mentor, becomes an icon. The man fades into the background. I read it 3 times. It wasn't even subtle. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I applied for a small arts grant under a pseudonym. I used an old script idea I'd once jotted down about a man who slowly realizes his life is a lie. It got approved. I used the funds to rent a small black box theater. I began writing in earnest, my revenge script taking shape one line at a time. All while Rachel kept clapping for Damon. She didn't even notice that I had stopped clapping. Looking back, I think she wanted to be caught. Or maybe she just didn't care anymore if I knew. The more I read, the more I realized that Rachel wasn't just channeling her emotions into her characters, she was chronicling her infidelity, page by page, and calling it art. Her scripts were like journal entries in disguise, and every performance was a confessional. She didn't whisper her secrets in the dark like most people. She shouted them on stage, wrapped in metaphor, trusting that the audience would only hear the poetry, not the truth. And I had been the willing fool, clapping from the front row. There was one line that burned into my memory. He sees me, but not all of me. The rest lives in the shadows with him. It was a throwaway line in a minor scene, one most people probably forgot as soon as the light shifted. But I remembered it. I remembered because those were the exact words she'd once said to me during a fight. A quiet, bitter moment after dinner one night when I told her she seemed distant. Maybe you only love the version of me that fits your story, she had said. At the time, I thought she was just tired, overwhelmed. But no, she had taken that moment, polished it, and handed it to Damon, who fed it back to her as performance. I started recording rehearsals. Damon had given me a kind of backstage pass after I invested in the troupe. No one questioned my presence anymore. I was just the quiet guy with the notebook, the one who brought coffee and smiled at everyone. Meanwhile, I was archiving everything. Voice memos, video clips, notes. Like a detective solving a mystery where I was both the investigator and the victim. The betrayal wasn't just emotional or physical. It was intellectual. She had plagiarized our life. And not in a way that celebrated our shared history. She had twisted it into a narrative of repression and escape. In her plays, I was always the obstacle, the clueless bystander, the dead weight she had to cut loose. One day, I found her journal. I hadn't meant to. She left it in the guest room, under a pile of costume sketches. I opened it to a random page, expecting maybe notes or half-written monologues. Instead, I found a list. Reasons I stay. Asterisk he's safe. Asterisk he doesn't ask questions. Asterisk I owe him too much. Asterisk guilt. And then, on the opposite page. Reasons I leave. Asterisk Damon sees me. Asterisk I feel alive with him. Asterisk he challenges me. Asterisk he makes me feel real. I read it twice. Then I took a picture and left the journal exactly as I found it. She came home that night glowing. They'd secured another venue. Damon was talking about taking the show on the road. She wanted to celebrate. I poured the wine, toasted her success, and asked if she wanted to hear some of my writing. She laughed and said, "Sure, let's hear what you've got, Hemingway." I read her a passage from my script. A monologue. About a man who realizes too late that his marriage was a rehearsal and the real performance was happening without him. She smiled, half interested, and said, "That's deep. Maybe a little melodramatic." Then she went to bed. Later that week, I followed her. Not in the movie sense, lurking in shadows. No, I followed her online. She used a separate email for her theater work. I found the password written on a sticky note in her desk drawer, masked as a line from one of her plays. Took me 2 tries to guess it. Inside were messages. Dozens. Hundreds. Some were professional. Rehearsal notes. Schedule changes. But many were intimate. Half flirtations. Late-night reflections. And one thread that caught my eye, messages to a man named S. Not Damon. Someone else. The tone was different. This wasn't an affair of soul-searching and creative longing. This was raw. Practical. She was complaining about Damon. About me. Asking S if his offer still stood. Saying she might leave it all behind. The betrayal had layers. Damon was her escape, her muse. But S? He was her exit strategy. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I just kept collecting. I took screenshots, exported emails, created a digital archive labeled Curtain Call. At one point, I considered confronting Damon. But what would that accomplish? He wasn't the mastermind. He was just another actor in her life's drama. And like any good director, he thought he was in control. Let him think that. Instead, I doubled down on my plan. I started reaching out to journalists. Quiet inquiries about covering the upcoming arts festival. I hinted at a dramatic revelation. A play within a play, I said, and left it at that. One local writer bit. She asked for an interview. I declined, but promised a scoop. Meanwhile, Rachel was busier than ever. She began sleeping in the guest room, claiming she needed space to focus. I nodded, wished her good night. Each time she shut that door, I felt less like a husband and more like an audience member waiting for the climax. One night, she left her phone charging in the living room. An alert popped up, a calendar reminder. Flight to Madrid. I checked the date. 2 weeks from now. A one-way ticket. That was my deadline. I rehearsed my part every night. Practiced the speech. Adjusted the lighting cues in the theater I had rented. Timed the moment I would walk on stage. I even considered costumes. But no. Simplicity would have more power. I also rehearsed my emotions. Looked in the mirror, tried different expressions. I wanted to appear calm. Grateful, even. Nothing would be more disarming than a man who smiles while detonating the truth. 2 days before the festival, Rachel told me she might be gone for a few days afterward. Damon thinks we need a creative retreat, she said. Somewhere remote. Sounds wonderful, I replied. She kissed my cheek. You're being so understanding lately. It means a lot. I smiled. She had no idea what role she was about to play. The final rehearsal was open to close friends and donors. I sat in the audience, pen in hand, pretending to take notes. Damon gave a speech afterward, thanking those who believe in dreams even when they can't see the vision. Rachel looked radiant under the stage lights. She blew a kiss to the crowd. I caught it. That night, I finished my script. My real one. Titled simply, Curtain Call. I printed copies, wrapped them in red ribbon, addressed each one to key members of the troupe, local media, and a few arts donors who had always supported Rachel. And then, I prepared the final prop. A folder. Inside, printouts of her emails, text threads, calendar plans, and a letter. A letter written in my hand, thanking Damon for inspiring the greatest performance of all. A woman who believed no one was watching. I didn't need to burn anything. I just needed to turn on the lights and let the show begin. By the time the festival week arrived, I was ready. Every move had been rehearsed, every detail sharpened like the final blade of a guillotine. My role was clear. I wasn't the abandoned husband anymore. I was the director now, and I had cast Rachel in the role of her lifetime. She just didn't know it yet. The arts festival was their crown jewel. Damon called it a cultural reset, a week-long celebration of independent voices and untold stories. Rachel, naturally, was featured in 3 of the headline plays. The buzz around town was electric. Posters bearing her face, ethereal, intense, beautiful, were plastered on every other lamppost. I smiled every time I passed one. The irony? She had become a star, thanks to the man she thought was holding her back. The night before opening, she came home later than usual, cheeks flushed, eyes gleaming with that artistic fire she reserved only for Damon these days. She tossed her bag on the couch, kicked off her shoes, and looked at me as if I were a roommate she didn't mind. Big night tomorrow, she said, stretching. Biggest yet, I agreed. You ready? She nodded, then paused. I'm glad we're in a good place. You've been understanding. It means more than you know. I kissed her forehead. Break a leg. She didn't notice the double meaning. The festival opened on a Friday. Her play, Echoes Between Us, was the main event. A drama about a woman escaping the confines of a suffocating marriage, written by Rachel, directed by Damon, and sponsored, unbeknownst to the audience, by the man being erased. I arrived early, sat in the front row again. 3rd seat from the left. My seat. The house filled slowly, an ocean of black coats and wine glasses, buzzing with anticipation. Damon was in the lobby, shaking hands, posing for pictures like a man convinced of his genius. Rachel floated beside him like a high priestess. Beautiful, distant, worshipped. Backstage, the actors prepped. Lighting was checked. Microphones tested. I watched it all from the shadows. Not interfering. Just waiting. And then the lights dimmed. The play unfolded flawlessly. Rachel was luminous. Her character, so clearly modeled on herself, was both fragile and fierce. The crowd was spellbound. I studied them, not her. Watching how easily they were seduced by performance, how willingly they swallowed fiction over fact. In the final scene, her character stood center stage, silhouetted in pale blue light. She delivered a monologue about rebirth, about letting go of the life that no longer served her. The audience sat in rapt silence, hanging on every word. When the lights went black, the applause was thunderous. Damon emerged from the wings, bowing modestly. Rachel joined him. Then the cast. All smiles. All triumph. And then I stood. I stepped onto the stage. At first, people thought it was part of the show. A meta twist. Some clapped. Some laughed nervously. Damon squinted at me, unsure. Rachel blinked, confused, then alarmed. Thank you, I said, my voice calm. I turned to the audience. I want to thank Rachel for her bravery tonight. It takes courage to lay one's soul bare. A few people clapped. Rachel shifted, mouth slightly open. And to Damon, I continued, turning toward him, thank you for believing in my wife. For mentoring her. For inspiring her. He smiled hesitantly. Well? I cut him off by handing him the folder. This, I said, is the real script. The one you didn't audition for. He opened it. Read the top page. His smile faltered. He flipped through emails, screenshots, calendar events. And then the letter. The one I'd written. A thank you note dressed as a dagger. The silence in the theater turned electric. I turned back to the audience. Art reflects life, they say. But sometimes, life is more theatrical than fiction. Sometimes the play you watch isn't the only one being performed. I looked at Rachel. Her eyes were wide. Her lips trembled. But she didn't speak. Tonight, I said, was Rachel's story. But tomorrow? Tomorrow, it's mine. I walked off stage to stunned silence. Not dramatic music. Not applause. Just silence. The kind that settles in when a crowd realizes they've been part of something real. Something raw. Backstage was chaos. Damon shouted after me. Rachel didn't follow. I walked calmly to the exit, stepped into the night, and breathed. I didn't go home. I went to the small black box theater I'd rented. The one where my play, A Theater for One, would premiere the next week. The cast was ready. The script polished. The story? A man who had been made invisible until he turned the spotlight around. I stood on the empty stage and smiled. She had written her play. Now it was my turn. And the curtain was just rising. In every good performance, there's an unseen force pulling the strings. That was me now, the man behind the curtain, the patron whose name didn't appear in the program. Rachel thought she was funded by a mysterious donor. Damon boasted about landing a wealthy sponsor. They never connected the dots. And why would they? No one suspects the ghost in the walls. After the onstage reveal, things changed quickly. The local press caught wind of the incident. A couple of journalists I'd quietly tipped off ran with the story. Live theater blurs lines between reality and performance. Some called it brilliant performance art. Others called it sabotage. Rachel called it betrayal. Damon, for once, had no lines to recite. But the best part? They still needed me. The arts festival, their grand showcase, was only halfway done, and they were short on cash. Ticket sales had been strong, but expenses had ballooned. Lavish set pieces, custom lighting, rental fees for that pretentious wine bar opening night. Damon had overpromised to donors. Rachel had burned through her advance. And their anonymous benefactor, me, still controlled the funding stream. I waited 2 days. Let the dust settle. Let the rumors swirl. Then I sent an email through the same shell account I'd used when funding the festival. To the artistic directors, given recent events, I understand the need for clarification. I remain committed to supporting the arts and believe that authentic expression should not be penalized. My final installment will be delivered by courier before the closing performance. Sincerely, a patron of truth. Rachel must have seen the message first. That afternoon, she left a note on the kitchen table. We should talk. Nothing else. No apology. No explanation. Just a bland olive branch offered too late. I didn't respond. Instead, I visited the printing shop. Ordered a second run of my own play. Asterisk curtain call asterisk had generated interest. The Black Box Theater was booked solid for the next week. Some believed it was a revenge piece. Others thought it was an avant-garde commentary on relational power dynamics. I didn't correct them. Let them see whatever play they needed to. By Friday, the final show of the festival loomed. Rachel was set to perform in the Mirror Room, another drama she'd co-written with Damon. A story about fractured identities and dual lives. How fitting. I arrived early again, dressed differently this time. Not the quiet husband in the corner, but the polished donor. Crisp navy blazer, polished shoes, a hint of cologne Rachel once bought me. People recognized me now. A few journalists nodded. One photographer snapped my picture. I smiled politely. Let the image circulate. Inside the lobby, I caught sight of Damon. He looked worn, nervous. Rachel stood beside him, scanning the crowd. When her eyes found me, she froze. I held up a small envelope. Just enough for her to see. Then I turned and walked to the VIP lounge. The play began on time. The crowd was thinner than before. The buzz of scandal had attracted some, but others stayed away. The performance itself? Hollow. Rachel hit her marks, said her lines, but the fire was gone. Damon directed from the sidelines like a man awaiting sentencing. After the final scene, the cast bowed. Scattered applause followed. A pale imitation of the thunderous ovation they expected. I stood, but didn't clap. Instead, I walked to the foot of the stage and placed the envelope on the boards. Inside, a check for the remaining funds. And a note. Every story deserves a proper ending. You wrote yours. I wrote mine. Now, you can finance your silence. Or not. It makes no difference to me. I left before the lights came back on. Outside, the night felt sharp, clean, like the air after a storm. I walked home slowly, savoring every step. Rachel didn't come home that night. Or the next. Eventually, I learned she had moved in with a friend from the troupe. Damon had gone silent, reportedly taking time off to reflect. Their next project was shelved indefinitely. Meanwhile, my play sold out again. I began receiving inquiries from other festivals. Critics called it a bold debut from a previously unknown voice. One even asked if it was based on a true story. I replied, "Aren't they all?" That week, I changed the locks, packed Rachel's remaining things in a neat box, left it with the doorman. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was free. And I had a story to tell. Freedom is a strange feeling. It doesn't arrive all at once. It trickles in like light through a cracked door, slowly illuminating the space you thought was empty. After the final show and Rachel's quiet departure, I expected to feel alone. Instead, I felt ready to write. The script that began as revenge had evolved. No longer just a dagger, it had become a mirror. The more I wrote, the more I saw myself, not just the betrayed husband, but the man I had been before her, before Damon, before theater. I started writing like a man possessed. Every scene came alive. Every line carried weight. My black box theater turned into a haven. The cast I hired, mostly up-and-coming local talent, brought a different energy. They weren't interested in gossip. They believed in the story. One of the actors, Clara, told me after the first read-through, "It's like you pulled this from a dream, or a nightmare that turned holy." I smiled. It was both. Word spread. The performances sold out. Then they added encore dates. Then a regional theater in another city asked to stage it. The email subject line read, "An invitation to tour." Rachel didn't reach out. Damon vanished from public life. I saw on social media that he had gone to a writing retreat in the Southwest. Rachel's Instagram turned into a string of vague quotes about growth and solitude. The comments dwindled. The likes disappeared. Meanwhile, I built something. I hired a manager. Not just for bookings, but for future projects. I had more stories to tell. I started writing a second play, fictional this time, but still anchored in betrayal and masks. Because once you see behind one mask, you start recognizing them everywhere. One evening, Clara and I went out for coffee after rehearsal. She asked what inspired me to write a theater for one. I considered lying, but the truth felt better. "My wife used to write plays about our life," I said. Without telling me, I was her muse. And her ghost. She blinked. "So this was your way of taking it back?" "No," I said. "This was my way of giving it away. Of turning pain into something that lives without hurting." She nodded slowly. "That's art." That night, I rewrote the final scene of the play. It had ended on a bitter note, the protagonist walking away from the ashes. Now, he returned to the stage, not in anger, but with a story. A gift. A way to say, "This happened, and I survived." I knew it wouldn't win awards for being edgy, but it felt honest. And sometimes, honesty is more radical than rage. When the play opened in the second city, the reviews came in strong again. One critic wrote, "This isn't just a revenge play. It's a resurrection." I saved that line. I wasn't chasing fame. I didn't want to go viral or land a movie deal. I wanted something simpler, to be heard, really heard, for the first time in a long time. One night, alone in the theater after the cast had gone home, I walked the stage. The lights dimmed just enough to cast long shadows. I stood center, looking out at the empty seats. "You used to sit here," I whispered. "Third seat from the left." I wasn't talking to anyone in particular. Maybe Rachel. Maybe a ghost. "I used to clap for you. Every time. Even when it hurt." Silence. Then I smiled. "Now they clap for me." I took a bow. No one watched. But I didn't need them to. Because I was finally playing my own part. While my new life gained quiet momentum, I continued turning over stones from the old one. Not out of obsession, not anymore, but out of a need to finish the story properly. Closure isn't found in applause or praise. It's found in understanding all the pieces, even the ones that hurt. And there was still one piece left. The mystery man from Rachel's secret emails. He hadn't appeared in any part of her public life, not in the theater circle, not in interviews, not in pictures. But the messages between them had a different tone. No performance, no poetic soul-searching. Just logistics. Dates. Flights. Plans. I revisited the messages. One detail kept catching my eye. She mentioned Barcelona more than once. "He lived there," she said. "An artist. An old friend." One message read, "Can we still do July? I need to know you're real." That phrase struck me. I need to know you're real. It made me wonder. I hired a researcher. Not a PI, just someone tech-savvy enough to dig. Within days, I had a name. Sergio Montes. His real identity? Not an artist. Not even Spanish. He was a self-proclaimed entrepreneur who ran a chain of online art residencies that turned out to be fronts for romance scams. Rachel had been duped. She'd been writing letters to a ghost. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel vindicated. If anything, I felt a pang of something like pity, not just for her, but for the version of her that needed someone like him to believe in. I printed the findings, added them to the folder with the rest of the evidence. Not to use, not to hurt, just to keep. A record, a rehearsal of her ruin. And then, life moved on. The play went national. Invitations from theater houses in Chicago, Seattle, and even a small venue in London began rolling in. I couldn't believe it. What had started as a quiet scream had become a chorus. Meanwhile, I kept writing. The second play turned into a trilogy. I explored themes of silence, self-erasure, and renewal. Every word was a brick in the new life I was building. Then, one morning, an envelope arrived. No return address. No stamp. Just my name. Inside, a letter. From Rachel. Handwritten. Neat. Almost too neat. You won, it began. I don't know what else to say. You made your point. You humiliated me. You turned our story into yours. Maybe I deserved it. I don't know anymore. All I know is, I never stopped believing I was doing something brave. I stopped reading halfway. Set it down. Let the ink dry a little more. A week later, I donated the entire folder, emails, photos, transcripts, the letter from Rachel, to a writer's museum. Anonymous. No attribution. Just documentation of how one man turned betrayal into narrative. I didn't need it anymore. Because I had built something bigger. A truth no one could take. And that, I realized, was the real revenge. Not the folder. Not the reveal. Not even the applause. But peace. Unbothered, unburdened peace. My rehearsals were over. The curtain had dropped on that chapter. And I was ready for a new script. Fame, even modest fame, has a rhythm. After the tours, the interviews, and the press photos, there comes a silence. A hush where no one is calling, no one is watching. Most find it unsettling. I found it peaceful. My plays had finished their runs. The trilogy was complete. The final piece, Exit Stage Left, dealt with letting go of something you once believed was your destiny. Audiences called it haunting, honest, and elegantly unresolved. Just like life. I moved into a smaller place. Something simpler. A studio above a bookshop, with creaky floors and sunlight that spilled in like golden syrup each morning. No more shared closets. No more separate rooms. Just space that was mine. People still recognize me occasionally. At readings. In cafes. One young woman asked if I had really lived through everything in the play. I smiled. Every word. She blinked. That must have been horrible. I nodded. And necessary. I began teaching part-time. Not literature or drama, storytelling. How to tell the truth without breaking it. How to frame pain so others can see themselves in it. The students were bright-eyed, eager, curious. They reminded me that not all stories start with betrayal. One of them asked me what I thought of happy endings. I said, they're real, but they never look how you think they will. That weekend, I went to see a local production of a theater for one. I wasn't involved in this staging. It was someone else's vision now. The theater was small, the audience intimate. I sat in the back. Anonymous. Watching. They changed the staging. They shifted some dialogue. But the heart remained. The final scene still ended with the man center stage, clapping alone. When the lights came up, the woman next to me sniffled. She wiped her eye and turned. I wasn't ready for that, she said. I smiled. Me neither. She looked closer. Wait. Are you? Just someone who needed a story, I said. She let it go. Outside, the night was cool. The kind of night that feels like the world has paused just long enough for you to catch your breath. I walked home slowly. No rush. No destination beyond the comfort of a warm room and a blank page. Because the applause had faded, and I no longer needed it. Rachel had become a ghost. I heard through friends that she moved to Oregon, tried to restart in a new troupe. The scandal had scarred her reputation. Damon, last I checked, was teaching workshops on method acting in some remote town. Their theater never reopened. I didn't rejoice in that. Their story was theirs to reconcile. Mine had found its echo. In every gasp from the audience. In every silent tear. In every stranger who said, I saw myself in that. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't need a script to feel seen. I was finally real. Not to Rachel. To myself. And that, I realized, was the ending I hadn't known I wanted all along. It started with a letter. A small envelope, cream-colored, sealed with a smudge of wax that looked like it had been pressed in haste. It arrived in the mailbox of my bookshop studio with no return address, no postmark. Just my name, written in a hand I knew well. Rachel. Inside, a single sheet, folded neatly. I saw your play, it read. Not the first one. The last. I almost walked out. But I stayed. And I cried in the back row. Not because of what you said, but because of how true it was. I never said thank you. For the years you gave me. For the grace you showed even when I didn't deserve it. I thought I was escaping a cage. Turns out, I was leaving shelter. I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know. I hear you now. There was no signature. Just a date. The same night she had vanished from the theater. I folded the letter back and slid it into a drawer. Not to forget. Not to preserve. Just to place it somewhere other than my heart. Because by then, I had already moved on. My latest project wasn't a play. It was a book. A memoir, of sorts. Not a retelling of the betrayal, but a study in reinvention. A story about becoming someone new when the world expects you to fall apart. The working title? Clapping Alone. I wrote it in the early hours of morning, when the city was quiet and the world felt intimate. The kind of intimacy I used to mistake for love. Now, I saw it for what it was, clarity. The book gained attention quickly. A publisher picked it up. They liked the framing, a playwright turned author who turned pain into prose. A journalist asked me in an interview if the character of Rachel was based on anyone specific. I said she was based on someone I used to know. That was the truth. She had become a shadow, a figure in a story. And I had stepped into the light. One night, I visited the original theater, the one where I first saw her on stage. It had changed ownership, new shows, new posters, but the velvet seats were the same. Third from the left. I sat in it, just for a moment, closed my eyes, heard the echo of that first applause, felt the ghost of my past brushing against my sleeve. And then, I stood, not to clap, not to mourn, just to leave, because the show was over, and I had taken my final bow, happily, quietly, and completely on my own terms. They say closure is a myth, that wounds don't heal, they just stop bleeding. But I disagree. Closure doesn't come with answers. It comes with acceptance. Years have passed since the curtain fell. My memoir became more than a book. It became a touchstone for others. Letters arrived weekly. From people who had been betrayed, yes, but also from people who had betrayed. Stories flooded in. Confessions. Redemptions. Regrets. One man wrote, "Your play saved my marriage." I realized I was Damon before I lost everything. Funny how honesty becomes therapy when dressed as fiction. I kept writing. Plays, essays, short stories. Not all about pain. Some about absurdity. Some about joy. I even wrote a comedy, which surprised my editor. "You're allowed to laugh now," she told me. "You earned it." I started teaching full-time. At first, it was just a course on narrative structure. Now, it's a full program. Storytelling is healing. My classroom is small, intimate. We sit in a circle. No desks, no distance, just people ready to be real. And in that room, I'm not a playwright or a husband who was left. I'm just a man who learned how to tell the truth. I still go to the theater sometimes. Alone. I sit in the back now. Watch faces more than scenes. Look for that flicker in the eye when something resonates. Once, a young actor performed a scene from a theater for one as part of a monologue showcase. He didn't know I was there. He got the cadence wrong, but the ache was perfect. Afterward, I introduced myself. He went pale. I had no idea. I shook his hand. "Keep telling stories. It matters." We smiled. And then, there was Clara, the actress from my first staging. We stayed in touch. Long letters turned into coffee. Coffee turned into conversation. Conversation turned into companionship. She knew everything. She never flinched. One morning, years later, we stood on a hill outside the city, overlooking quiet trees. She took my hand. "Do you still miss her?" she asked. I thought for a long moment. I miss who I thought she was, but not who she turned out to be. Clara nodded. "That's fair." She squeezed my hand. And we stood there. No audience. No script. No stage. Just light. Just peace. Just the quiet triumph of a man who once clapped alone. And now? He clapped with someone beside him.